So thanks for coming back here for this roundtable discussion on Indigenous health and colonization and how colonization affected our health. So yeah, the one thing I was thinking about, so I was thinking about my own family and how diabetes runs through it so much, and so I do have to pay attention to my diet as well, quite keenly because of it being in my family. So I was kind of wondering, like, how much of this is genetic, how much of this isn't, and definitely when it comes to the Indigenous population, the more I read about it, the more the huge thing that stands out is just the change in diet, and how before the Indigenous way of living was much more connected to a balanced way of life and diet, so hunting and growing foods that were healthy and not using sugar, flour, processed foods. But of course, since I think over time when that good land was taken away and other new ways of eating and doing things were forced upon them, they had to change everything. So they were forced to eat the more processed foods, and that's all that's affordable anyway, right?
So is that what got you interested in trying to get more information? Was it your own personal health was affected? Or?
Yeah, well, actually, my grandparents and aunts and uncles, and even my sister at birth, they were saying she could have a propensity towards it. And I know for myself, like, just my eating habits really, like, my intake of sugar is very, it just affects my health a lot. So I have to be careful. So I just have blood sugar issues sometimes. So then I thought, well, is this a genetic thing? And I did some research, and it did say there is a genetic component, just this thrifty gene that creates greater fat storage to get through winter, to get through longer periods without food. But when we have access to sort of high calorie, low nutrient foods, and we eat those, our body just like stores it all up.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if back then they would be working so hard on the land and being outdoors and everything was physical, but now our lifestyle isn't like that. So it's not like the fat stores getting used, it's just staying there.
The different animals that they ate as well too, all wild animals, it's all lean, there's nothing in there. They had berries, so if they had any, it was all natural sugars from the berries. The maple was, a source of something that was great for them that wasn't high in sugar and whatnot too. So I think that has a big part on not being able to do the ways that they do things traditionally anymore. So
right. And the other thing too, like when I was doing some reading on this, it was saying that the Indigenous people on reserves tended to have higher rates of diabetes compared to the ones off reserve. So I think there could be a lack of access to healthcare on the reserves as well, and that can influence things like they're maybe having more wellness programs and things like that would help, and just greater access to healthier food I think would be key, like to not be forced to have to buy craft dinner or just the processed stuff all the time, because it's all that is affordable, right?
So everything's really expensive.
And
regular testing is key too. Regular testing, going in for regular testings, and I feel that in reserves they just don't have amenities for it. Most hospitals are pretty far out, so people are not going to want to go take the travel out there. Plus, most people don't drive, so getting out to have these testings is causing higher rates as well.
The other thing I noticed too was there's a higher rates now of gestational diabetes, as well as it being found more in young children. And so that creates a higher risk of complications as well. So the earlier you're diagnosed, the higher chance of complications. And I was kind of appalled at the amount of complications seen in the Indigenous populations. So 60% of patients were found to have at least one major complication, like renal failure or an amputation, because there's a lack of circulation that goes to the extremities. So it's pretty severe and kind of scary when it's like an epidemic. And why isn't it being treated as such? Like, why isn't it being taken care of? Why aren't health officials taking steps? Is what concerns me.
It almost seems like it's a big major disease portion that's taking over, kind of like it would be like back in the day, smallpox and fever, black fever or whatever, wiped a lot of the native population out. This is what it seems like to me is almost like
it was like brought in from the Europeans. They brought in their ways of doing things and the types of foods that they ate, like the white flour and sugar and all that came in, and and it's not appropriate. It's not good healthy food. So
I feel like the government, because it is so much targeted in the Indigenous population rather than the general population, that they just don't pay attention. The funding isn't there. But if this was happening to 80% of women in the general population, I bet there would be a lot more.
There'd be huge funding, media coverage.
Yeah.
It would be night and day.
Yeah.
Honestly speaking.
Yeah.
Even the strips now, they've just said that the strips are, it's not covered anymore, and it was like, so how do you expect us to, how do they expect them to test their blood if you're not going to be able to provide them with the strips now as well? Right. So, but again, if it was anywhere else, they'd be giving it to them constantly all the time. Where do you go? Here's these clinics. Come grab them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's absolutely upsetting.
Yeah, so I was, trying to find that ray of hope, and I did find something about, I don't know what it's called there. It's called the Aboriginal Diabetes Initiative, which started in 1999. So it was a bunch of funding, $58 million over 5 years. And so basically what they were trying to do, getting the Indigenous communities to develop their own approaches and sort of wellness programs for their communities, to involve walking clubs, weight loss groups, diabetes workshops, fitness classes, community kitchens, community gardens, and healthy school food policies. And they supported traditional activities such as traditional food harvesting and preparation, canoeing, drumming, dancing, and traditional games. So I think there's this effort. I'm hopeful about that effort to sort of bring in some of this new old traditions coming back into the community. So, yeah.
That's great, absolutely. I think along the same lines as he was talking about health and your health and wellness, that kind of goes hand in hand, in my opinion, just with getting the knowledge about Indigenous suicide and just trying to really wrap our heads around it fully. I know that, the media have their about having suicide awareness, but not specific, because even here in town you have a Team 55 initiative where a high school student had taken his life, and so they, these parents, and it's just a huge positive step us towards trying to help towards suicide awareness and mental health issues. But when I look at the Indigenous population, which has a suicide rate from ages 50 to 24, which is 5 to 6 times higher than the actual national average, to me says you need to have a higher awareness, even still. Yes, we're getting there as to realize, that suicide it touches everybody. But then when you think about it and realize the Indigenous population is 5 to 6 times higher than national average, is that we really, this is a huge problem. And if the general public would attack that with the vigor that it needs to, for instance, like Bell Let's Talk, they flood the airwaves, whether it's news, social media, whichever, about Bell Let's Talk for that one particular day, which is fantastic.
But that's just one day.
That's one day. That's one day, and then think about it: 5 to 6 times higher than a national average.
So what do they think is the cause of that being so much higher?
It's colonization from, you've got mental health issues, you have alcoholism, drugs, addiction, being isolated on your reserves without, as we've already mentioned, the proper medical entities there to help you. So there's this large sense of hopelessness and loss.
Yeah, I saw on the news when they were showing scenes from the Attawapiskat suicide crisis that like all the houses were just like shacks and like things that I would expect to see in third world countries, not Canada, but yet here they are, and like I could see how that would just have such an impact on like your sense of wellness and the fact that people care about you. Your
what future do you have?
That lack of the isolation factor and lack of community activities and recreation and just those things that like keep life going and keep your mental health positive, right? That's lacking, and especially in those harsh climates like Attawapiskat and just any in the northern communities, you're always under environmental stresses that do influence your state of well-being.